Why do we care so much about the lives of strangers on the internet? It's a profound question that lies at the very heart of the modern creator economy, a multi-billion-dollar industry built not on products, but on personalities. The answer is a fascinating and complex psychological phenomenon known as the parasocial relationship, a one-sided, often deeply intimate bond that audiences form with media figures. We invest our time, our emotions, our loyalty, and even our sense of identity into their stories, feeling as though we know them as intimately as our own friends. But what happens when the very object of that collective investment, a seemingly unbreakable friendship that has been packaged and sold as the ultimate symbol of loyalty, publicly self-destructs? There is no greater, more recent, or more illustrative example of this modern tragedy than the spectacular and messy collapse of the Tana Mongeau friend group. This is not a story about online drama, gossip, or tea. This is a deep dive analysis into the complex and often brutal psychology of modern fame. We are going to deconstruct the specific character archetypes that define this group and made it so compelling, yet so inherently unstable. We will explore the unwritten parasocial contract that the Cancelled podcast masterfully created with its millions of devoted listeners, and we will analyze why its ultimate violation felt like such a deep and personal betrayal to so many. We will pinpoint the psychological fracture points, the subtle shifts in power, ambition, and personal identity that made this collapse not just possible, but entirely inevitable. And finally, we will analyze the chaotic aftermath as a desperate exercise in psychological survival and strategic, public rebranding. This is a definitive case study on the immense human cost of living a life where your public persona and your private person become dangerously and inextricably intertwined. At the very center of this universe was Tana Mongeau, who embodied the archetype of the chaotic sun. Like a massive star, her gravitational pull was immense, irresistible, and all other bodies within her social sphere were forced to orbit her. Her brand of unpredictable, often self-destructive, but always captivating energy was the primary source of the group's power, its narrative engine, and its endless stream of content. She was the protagonist, the anti-hero, and the primary, often volatile driver of every single storyline. Her actions dictated the emotional weather of the entire ecosystem. Then we have Brooke, who masterfully played the archetype of the grounded narrator, or, perhaps more accurately, the witty survivor. Her fundamental role within the narrative was to be the audience's anchor in the relentless storm of Tana's life. She was the one who translated the chaos, who provided the sharp, sarcastic, and often necessary commentary, and who maintained a semblance of relatability amidst the absurdity of their shared existence. For years, this dynamic was a picture of perfect, symbiotic balance. Brooke's grounded perspective made Tana's larger-than-life chaos consumable and often hilarious, while Tana's chaos provided the perfect backdrop for Brooke's intelligence and wit to shine brightly. Surrounding this central duo were other key archetypes essential to the plot. Paige Lorenz, who increasingly came to embody the loyal enforcer, a figure whose fierce and unwavering loyalty to Tana became a core and defining part of her public brand identity. And on the other side, BB, who for years played the role of the devoted confidant to Brooke, the person who existed primarily to support the narrator, her silent presence reinforcing Brooke's own narrative. For a time, this ecosystem worked flawlessly because everyone understood and performed their role to perfection. The conflict, however, became structurally inevitable at the precise moment one of the key players, Brooke, began to fundamentally outgrow her archetype. She was no longer content being just the narrator of Tana's story. She was becoming a main character in her own right, with her own audience, her own ambitions, and her own gravitational pull. And in a solar system that was psychologically and commercially designed to revolve around a single, blazing sun, the emergence of a second star was a thermodynamic impossibility, one that guaranteed a future, cataclysmic explosion. The unprecedented success and cultural impact of the canceled podcast cannot be overstated, and its genius lay in its masterful creation and exploitation of a deep and binding parasocial contract with its audience. The show wasn't just a weekly recap of chaotic events, it was a meticulously, if perhaps unintentionally, constructed illusion of profound intimacy. The very format, long, rambling, unstructured conversations filled with private inside jokes, shocking moments of vulnerability, and seemingly unfiltered stream of consciousness thoughts, was precision engineered to make millions of listeners feel as though they weren't just a passive audience, but a silent, welcome member of the friend group they were in on. This unwritten parasocial contract had several key implicit terms. In exchange for their hours of weekly listening, their social media engagement, and their fierce devotion, the audience was granted what felt like unprecedented, intimate access to the real Tana and Brooke. They were sold a front-row seat to what was marketed as a completely authentic, unbreakable friendship. The podcast's entire value proposition was built on the audience's unwavering belief in the reality of this authenticity. Listeners weren't just consuming disposable content, they were actively investing their own emotions into the stability and perceived success of this central relationship. We, the global audience, felt like we understood their complex dynamic, that we could decipher their inside jokes, that we were part of the secret society they had built. This is precisely why the eventual public fallout was so uniquely impactful and felt so deeply by so many. When the friendship publicly fractured and the podcast ended, it wasn't just two influencers parting ways. For the audience, it was a fundamental and painful breach of the parasocial contract. The millions of listeners who had invested so much of their own emotional energy felt cheated, lied to, and ultimately abandoned. The product they had been sold, a genuine ride-or-die friendship that could withstand anything, was revealed to be, in their eyes, a fragile and ultimately disposable business arrangement. The subsequent social warfare, the public choosing of sides, and the strategic, almost corporate-like realignments of the friend group felt like a betrayal not just to the people involved, but to the millions who had been so deeply invested in the beautiful illusion. The intense anger and hurt expressed by so many fans online wasn't just about a love for drama. It was the genuine pain of discovering that the intimate two-way relationship they thought they had was in fact a one-sided and ultimately terminated transaction. Every psychological ecosystem, no matter how stable it appears on the surface, has a definitive breaking point. For the Tana Mongeau friend group, the fracture occurred at the precise moment when the immense and unrelenting pressure of performing their assigned archetypes became heavier and more psychologically costly than the considerable rewards of maintaining them. Living a public life as a simplified human product requires a constant, draining, and often invisible expenditure of emotional and psychological energy. For years, Tana and Brooke were able to masterfully sustain their public-facing personas, blurring the lines between their real selves and their content-generating characters. But immense success, and the profound personal growth that often comes with it, began to create deep and irreparable cracks in that carefully constructed facade. Brooke Schofield's personal and professional evolution from the grounded narrator to a burgeoning media mogul in her own right was the primary catalyst for the system's collapse. Her growing independence, her clear desire for a more stable and curated brand, and her palpable on-screen exhaustion with the relentless, cyclical chaos of the Tana-centric universe became increasingly visible to anyone paying attention. The sharp, witty commentary that was once her trademark began to be tinged with a genuine, weary, and undeniable resentment. The performance was, quite simply, becoming unbearable for her. It became clear that for her to continue to grow, both personally and professionally, she had to break free from the archetype that had initially made her famous, but was now, just as powerfully, holding her back from her own potential. This created an unsolvable psychological dilemma for the entire group. When a key player in a narrative ecosystem refuses to continue playing their assigned role, the entire story collapses. Tana, as the chaotic sun, requires orbiting planets to maintain her position and her narrative function. Brooke's decision to break from her designated orbit and become her own sun created not just a power vacuum, but a profound identity crisis for the entire brand. The end of the podcast, therefore, should be viewed not primarily as a business decision, but as a desperate and necessary act of psychological self-preservation on Brooke's part. It was the inevitable and explosive result of individuals who could no longer sustain the exhausting 24/7 performance of being a simplified, flattened, and ultimately marketable version of their true selves. The product was breaking down because the humans inside were, quite simply, done playing their parts. The immediate aftermath of a massive public collapse is a crucial and delicate period of psychological recalibration and urgent narrative reconstruction. For public figures like Tana and Brooke, this deeply personal process takes the highly visible form of public rebranding. As of our report in September 2025, we can analyze their divergent post-breakup careers not just as calculated business strategies, but as fascinating and revealing acts of public narrative therapy, each designed to reclaim their identity and tell a new story to the world, and, perhaps most importantly, to themselves. Tana's journey, in contrast, has been psychologically more complex and turbulent. The collapse of her most successful partnership left her without her primary narrator, her creative foil, and her emotional anchor, forcing her to find a new professional and personal equilibrium in the public eye. Her various ventures into new formats, like the long-rumored reality show, can be seen as a public search to recapture the lightning-in-a-bottle dynamic she lost, a quest for a new ecosystem to build and to lead. The strategic and highly visible alliance between her best friend Paige and BB is another key psychological move. It was an act of consolidation, a clear attempt to build a new, more stable, and unquestionably loyal inner circle to protect her from future instability and betrayal. It was a power move designed not just for public perception, but to create a tangible sense of security in the wake of a profound professional and personal rupture. Both women are not just building new businesses, they are building new identities, using their massive public platforms to psychologically process the trauma of the collapse and redefine, on their own terms, who they are in its aftermath. Deconstructing the entire Tana Mongeau saga through a purely psychological lens reveals a deeply human and ultimately cautionary tale that is often lost beneath the endless layers of online drama, speculation, and schadenfreude. It serves as a stark exposé of the immense and often unsustainable psychological toll that the modern creator economy exacts on its brightest and most successful stars. The relentless pressure to embody a simplified, marketable archetype, the constant and exhausting demand to perform authenticity for an insatiable audience, and the disorienting, often damaging nature of parasocial relationships create a perfect storm for emotional burnout, identity crises, and the spectacular implosion of real-world relationships. This definitive case study teaches us that influencer groups are not simply friendships. They are complex, fragile psychological systems with their own delicate, unspoken rules and hierarchies. It shows us that the audience is never a passive observer, but an active, emotionally invested participant in a complex and often unequal emotional contract. But most importantly, it serves as a powerful reminder that behind every meticulously crafted human product, there is still a human being, grappling with the same universal desires for validation, control, respect, and an authentic sense of self. The ultimate legacy of the canceled empire's dramatic fall may not be the endless drama it created, but the stark and uncomfortable questions it forces us, as a culture, to ask about the vanishing lines between the self and the persona, the true and heavy cost of a completely commodified life, and the very human limits of performance in the unblinking, all-seeing eye of the internet.